Dr. John Lundgren is an agroecologist and executive director of I said it right.
You just got it.
I just said it, John. Why did I do that? Ecdysis Foundation and CEO for Blue Dasher Farm. Lundgren's research and education programs are helping applied science evolve in ways that foster the evolution of regenerative food service system. One of his priorities is to re-envision how science is conducted to help fuel a revolution in regenerative agriculture. He regularly, normally interacts with the public and farmers around the world regarding ecologically intensive farming and how diversity fuels the resilience and productivity of an agro-ecosystem and rural communities. With all that coming out of my mouth with a few mistakes, everyone please welcome Dr. John Lundgren to the stage.
Very good to be here. Hello, hello. Is this thing working? Can you guys hear me okay? Closer? Oh, all right. My name is John Lundgren. I run Blue Dasher Farm with Christina down there in the plaid. I'm also a scientist. Closer? Sweet Jesus. All right, here we go. I also run Ecdysis Foundation, which is a nonprofit research and science organization. I am a farmer. I'm going to say and a beekeeper. I'm going to say some controversial things that's going to piss a lot of people in this room off, all right? So I apologize for that to begin with, but I also want you to know that I am on your side, all right? I'm not selling you anything. We've been all over the country now. Our scientific teams have visited more than 1,300 farms over the last 3 years studying regenerative agriculture. Florida citrus. We were down in Florida, and it's amazing how how farms become the identity of a place, isn't it, sometimes? We all know Florida as where you get oranges, right? I remember watching Kenny Rogers drink orange juice in commercials when I was a kid. You guys remember that ad campaign? Yeah, he seemed to really like them. Well, what people don't know is that over the last 20 years, Florida is down to about 4% of their production. 4%. It's declined by 96% over the last 20 years. And they're claiming it's because of a virus, but I think if they really want to get to the solution, they're going to have to look a little harder in the mirror. They killed their soil. So the disease is citrus greening. The powers that be say that the answer to this is to inject each tree with antibiotics. Okay. I met a conventional farmer down there, and we were talking, and he explained to me he thought that the trees' roots were anemic, that they weren't growing right, and that was probably one of the problems. And I was talking with him, and I said, we've been meeting farmers. They're bringing their orchards back to life. And one of the tricks that they're using is they're planting vegetation from fence post to fence post. For the most part, the industry sprays out most vegetation from the ground, and so they get rid of it. He said, this is an example of one of those orchards. He said, John, if that's true, if growing vegetation from trunk to trunk is the answer, then that flies in the face of everything that we're being told by the university systems, by the citrus board. I mean, that can't be right. We're following the best practices as defined by these groups. I asked him, how's it working? And he thought about it for a second, and he kind of nodded, and he said, yeah, you're right. They're not looking out for us little guys. There's a problem in agriculture right now. Problem is on this screen. It's not soybeans, it's how we're growing our soybeans. Okay? Agriculture has become far too simplified. You see, when we have a biodiverse ecosystem with lots of different plant species that are growing on a single piece of ground, that ecosystem functions, that works. Those plants and the organisms that it supports work together to fuel the productivity of that piece of ground, that habitat, of that farm. When you eliminate the diversity and you plant a single plant species, then you eliminate the productivity of that piece of ground. All of that biology that used to work for free, you now have to replace with a jug. And I don't care if it says regenerative or organic or conventional on that jug, they all do one thing. They replace what life did for free. Okay? So, one of the things that we're doing to increase our productivity is when we eliminate the life, we eliminate the biotic resistance to pest proliferation, and so we have to respond to that problem with insecticides. Corn seeds, soybean seeds, wheat seeds, alfalfa seeds, they are not normally blue, green, red, right? They don't grow them that way. They're that color because they're treated with insecticides and fungicides. How many of you in this audience have heard of neonicotinoids before? That's great. That's great. One corn seed has enough insecticide to kill 164,000 bees. Okay, that's a lot. We plant this on a big part of our country right now. One of my friends, she lives out in Montana. She started seeing weird things happening in the white-tailed deer population. Okay, she said 70% of the deer in her county had these jaw deformities. The males of the hunter-killed deer had genital deformities. And she wanted to know whether or not these neonicotinoid insecticides, it's insecticides that come on crop seeds that are taken up by the developing plant in order to protect it from early season herbivory. She wanted to know whether or not those insecticides might be hurting those deer. This is a study that was extremely difficult, and it will never be repeated again. Elise was our graduate student together with John Jenks at South Dakota State, who's a wildlife biologist. We administered captive-bred deer neonicotinoid insecticides in their water, and we monitored those deer for 2 generations. Okay. Imidacloprid is the neonicotinoid. The tissue that seemed to be the most affected, or rather correlated best with some of these fitness parameters, was the spleen. So you're going to see a lot of things talking about the spleen, but she looked at livers, brains, blood, milk, you name it. We tried a whole bunch of different things. The dead fawns out of this study ended up having substantially more neonicotinoids in their spleens. The amount of imidacloprid in the spleens of these animals was associated with reduced fawn body weight, fawn organ weights. That makes sense. A smaller fawn has smaller organs, right? Thyroid hormone levels. Know of anybody in your life with hyperthyroidism right now? I do. Fawn jawbone lengths, that sounds familiar. Activity levels in adult deer were slower. What's a slow deer in the wild? Dead deer, right? I could change this. I could take this picture off right here and I could replace it with a bee, a honeybee, and it would probably be the same exact slide. I could replace this with us. Guess what? John, that's what you were able to generate experimentally under controlled conditions, right? This is how much we were able to get into those spleens. We live in the real world, right? That's under experimental conditions. We want to know what's reality out there. Well, the North Dakota Game Fish and Park sent us all of their hunter-killed spleens, and we tested those. They have 3 times the quantity. Then we were able to generate under forced conditions in the laboratory. It's time to wake up, folks. Time to wake up. 41% of the land in South Dakota is currently planted with neonicotinoids. Wow. And that's just on the eastern half, folks. It's probably closer to like 90% in the eastern half of South Dakota, because the western half isn't planted with crops as much. All right? Where are we living? Watch your water. How's it working? Right? I had to ask myself this question as a scientist because I used to work for the USDA. All right? I worked within the framework of conventional science. I did all of the things I was supposed to do. We all chase metrics of success, right? To be a good scientist. I knew nobody had better stats than I did. I got an award from the President of the United States in the White House for being one of the top scientists in the country. But I could drive from my house in South Dakota over to my folks' place in the Twin Cities. Things are getting better. Are they getting better? Climates are changing. Rural communities are disappearing. People are sick. Farmers are sick. That's when I quit. And I decided if we were going to try to change this thing, that it was going to have to be done differently. And I started meeting farmers around the country that were changing their lives in ways that gave me inspiration and hope. And I decided that we needed to start putting scientific data behind what the farmers were showing was possible. What farmers like you in this room that come to this conference is showing what is possible. We developed a different experimental framework. Okay, so what this regenerative agriculture, they didn't know that they were being called, that they were regenerative farmers when they got started, but boy, after a while, this regenerative term really came out. What is this regenerative agriculture? So there's going to be a whole lot of farms that are stamped regenerative, that are labeled regenerative, that check these boxes. They stop tilling, or they dramatically reduce it. They never leave bare soil. They have substantial plant diversity. They integrate crops and livestock together. And I would argue that they're eliminating synthetic chemical use as a result of building these systems. But now I understand that is like the cart that regenerative folks haul out when they want to describe what a regenerative system is. And I'm not sure that it really captures the spirit or the heart of what a regenerative farm is. Regenerative agriculture at its core connects us with the natural world. It connects us with family, with community, all right? And unless it does this, you are not going to achieve what's possible in a regenerative situation. Okay. We have to be putting science behind this. The farmers are leading this charge by a long shot. Folks in this room are leading this charge by a long shot. And the scientific community is scrambling to try to figure out what this regenerative thing even is, because they're relying on antiquated data and experiments that were conducted on experiment stations rather than on real farms. And without the humility of understanding that the farmers are the ones that are really the ones developing the best management practices. The scientific community, it will not come from them, okay? So we decided that a different kind of science was really needed for this project. Systems level, we had to start crossing these discipline-specific barriers So like entomologists study bugs and weed scientists study weeds and soil scientists study it. No, we need to simultaneously have all of these different facets of the system studied together, okay? Farmer driven. It's a humble thing to have to say that, you know, after all of your scientific training, that you are not the expert at farming, that the farmers are the experts on farming. Scientists were never meant to be. We were always meant to be servants. This has to cross ecoregions, and it has to reflect real food systems, okay? And that led us, all of that led us to what we are calling the 1,000 Farms Initiative. This is maybe not the biggest, but it sure is big. And what we've done is we are trying to validate, does regenerative agriculture work, no matter what you grow and where you grow it? And number two, farmers are doing this. There are anecdotal success stories in every community that I've ever seen. How are they getting there? Okay, can we empirically tease out what practices seem to work really well so that new farmers that are interested in practicing these things don't experience the same hardships? This is where we've gone. This is over the last 3 years. We've been on 1,300 farms, and we deploy from our home base a regenerative farm, Blue Dasher farm, that actually we might, I don't know, can we give a tour or something on Friday? If people are interested, you guys are all welcome to come down. It's literally 20 minutes away. Where our home base is, we deploy scientific teams all over the country. So you see, have you ever, played the game Risk before? Where you're trying to conquer the world or whatever? This is like Risk, where you're trying to like expand into new regions while maintaining your relationships with farmers here and there. And yeah, it gets real complicated really fast. There's a reason nobody's ever done a continental scale research project before. It's a royal pain in the ass. Currently we've been on 35 different cropping systems, depending on how you define what a cropping system is. 5+ livestock systems. All of this is to say it's a lot. We're trying to measure, we're trying to capture our food system of the United States. So where are we going this year? You can kind of get an idea, can't you? Each of these farms, each of those little dots, they fall along a continuum, okay? They go from very conventional to wacko regenerative, all right? And everywhere in between. And we can assign each of these farms a score based on their management practices. In 2 minutes, I can kind of tell you not only where you fall on that continuum, but I can tell you what your soil carbon's going to be. I can tell you how fast your water's going in, how many lady beetles you're going to find, how happy you are. Lots of different things. On each of these farms, we are measuring a lot of different things. First off, the nutrition of the food products themselves. We're partnering with folks like the American Heart Association, Edacious, if you've ever heard of this company, where they're doing some of the most comprehensive nutrient testing on foods that has ever been done before. And we're tying that back to management to see whether or not regenerative agriculture actually produces healthier food. We're digging soil probes, going deep, looking at carbon, looking at micronutrient status. Keith's full nutrient digest and Haney tests we're doing on each of these farms in replicate. We have, what are we up to, like 50,000 probes or something, soil samples that we've run so far? Something like that. Ryan, do you remember? It's a lot. Water, we're seeing how fast it goes in, how well that soil holds on to it. But what really sets this project aside from everything else that's out there is that we are quantifying the life on our food system at a scale that has never happened before. So far, we've identified about 14,000 species, 10,000 bacterial and fungal species from the soil. We are developing machine learning, artificial intelligence algorithms for being able to identify this stuff. We're making poor Casey Jensen walk like hundreds and hundreds of miles to identify the birds across North America in our crops. We're pretty darn lucky. We're pretty darn lucky. And then we're looking at the economics and management of each of these different places and working with the farmers, but most importantly, we're listening. We're hearing the stories. We were out on New York dairy. We were working with some Amish farmers out there. And I explained to him what we were studying. And we're like, okay, we're going to look at the soil carbon. And he's like, yeah. And we're going to look at water and and nutrients and stuff. And then I'm like, and then we're going to tell you all of the species of bacteria that we're finding in your soil. And he got a little brighter. His eyes got a little brighter. And I'm like, we're going to look at all the plants. And we're going to name all the bugs and all of the birds that we're finding on your farm. And every time his eyes got a lot wider, and I asked him later, why did that biodiversity measurement resonate so well with you? And he said, John, as part of our faith, humans, farmers, are meant to be stewards of life. And of all of the scientific teams that are coming to our farms, no one is measuring that. They're telling us about carbon, but they're not telling us about the life. And with regenerative farms, regenerative agriculture is a celebration of life in all of its different facets. And we got the numbers. So this paper 2 weeks ago was submitted to Nature. It has not been rejected yet, but it documents the first 2 years of row crop data across North America. Does this work? Okay, we're going to talk carbon. So I could talk I could put you to sleep with this kind of stuff, okay? But I'm just going to focus on a few different components of the data. First off, carbon. Oh, we love this stuff. Money, right? We love carbon. That's what that is. The U.S. produces a lot of carbon dioxide. We're sending it into the atmosphere, okay? About 6 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalents per year. A gigaton is a lot, okay? Agriculture is a contributor to this, all right? Through our soil management practices, we're sending a lot of that carbon that we want to keep because that drives the productivity of our system. We're sending it up into the atmosphere where it's getting hotter. Yeah. It's real, okay? This is real. We've lost, out of the last 3 years, every year we lose 2 clusters at least of farms to natural disasters. Entire groups of farmers. They're just gone. They burned. Or a hurricane hit them. This is real. If you don't believe it, pull your head out of your butt, please, for the God's sake. All right. So this is, okay, can we use agriculture as a way of increasing the carbon storage potential of the soil? The answer is yes. Look at how much more total carbon was found within the soil column in the regenerative farms versus the conventional. About 46% more. That is equivalent to about twice the annual emissions of the United States if we were to devote just row crops to regenerative practices. That is huge. That is the best carbon capture outcome that's around right now. Nobody has this data except for us. And we did it from a pole shed in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota. Biodiversity. We are currently living through the worst mass extinction event that has ever occurred. We are losing species at a rate that has never happened on Earth before. This is worse than when the dinosaurs went extinct. We're losing entire habitats. We're losing entire insect communities. Have you heard of the insect apocalypse? Anybody hear this? We've lost about, in certain areas that we've actually got measurements on, we've lost 60% of the biomass of insects over the last 20 years. That's a lot. When you were growing up, a lot of people used the windshield test as a measure of this, so you used to have to clean your windshield a lot more from dead bugs than you do today. Butterflies. Whoa. birds, bats, bees, right? We're losing all of these different groups of organisms. Can regenerative ag help this? So we measured a whole bunch of stuff. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Every single organismal group that we measured was significantly improved on regenerative farms versus conventional. Look at plants. I had to cut the bar in half. We couldn't even get it onto the screen, for crying out loud. Because those plants are so important. That basis is how you are, like we heard earlier today, that is how you capture the carbon from the atmosphere and put it down into the soil. And the biology, almost every other single group ends up scaling with how many plants are in that habitat. So it becomes this really pivotal tool for farmers to use to increase the productivity of their farms. What was also really interesting is that every single organismal group that we looked at, from bacteria and fungi to bugs to birds to plants, it scaled with how much carbon was in the soil. You want to know why? Because that's where the carbon comes from. For folks that are interested in increasing carbon and the productivity of their farm, stop worrying about carbon. Take care of life. The carbon will behave itself. Take care of life on your farm. Grow life on your farm. The water will take care of itself. So this is actually a biological community. How much more life that we would need to establish on regenerative farms in order to offset 1 year's worth of emissions. We'd have to double the amount of plants on farms. That's actually not real hard. That's a cover crop species, right? I mean, this is totally doable. Why are we incentivizing yields? My God, a well-trained monkey can grow 300 bushel corn if he buys enough junk, right? We should be incentivizing how much life you're growing on your farm. Regenerative farms, corn, wheat, soybeans, the yields in regenerative farms were exactly the same as the national averages. We can feed the world using these crops. Conventional yields were higher, but not always. They didn't have to be. In every case, the profit was the same as well. Okay, so in every single case, in every single one of these different examples that we look at, we've got these weirdos out here. We've got regenerative farmers that are outperforming any of the conventional farmers that are out there. So why is it that all regenerative farmers aren't, going straight to the bank? It's a really important question. And I have a feeling that this comes from the social drivers of behavior. When we ask, we were out in a blueberry farm in North Carolina. It was this elderly gentleman, and he had an organic U-pick operation out there. And it was a Sunday, he was closed. And there was a guy out there picking berries. He's like, it's okay. He just comes out, I let him pick. I'm like, all right. By the time we were done sampling that guy's farm, it was full of people, families that were out there on a Sunday picking blueberries when the farm was closed. And I had just gotten done digging soil probes. It was hot. I was tired. He was sitting in a rocking chair on his deck, and he was watching the show. And I went over to sit by him, and he's like, John, I got something to tell you. And I leaned a little closer, and he's like, John, it's not about the money. Take care of your community, and the money's going to come. That's different. That is so different than the mentality that we are currently drives so much of our behavior right now. The greed. Farmer motivations behind management decisions. We asked them. There was a disproportionate number of conventional farmers versus regenerative farmers that prioritize finances, expanding the size of their operations, yield, and the legacy of past generations. When we asked regenerative farmers, there was a disproportionate number of these farmers that prioritize mental and physical wellness of their families compared to conventionals. They have different values that are driving their decisions. What's interesting is that, all right, I'll say it, the elephant in the room. We visited farms that were growing everything across this country. You know who the most miserable farmers were? Cash grain producers. Cash grain producers. Legacy of past generations. What are your metrics of success? Did you buy that next quarter? Do you have a clean field? Are you getting flack down at the co-op or at the coffee shop? Yeah. Well, Grandpa was real good at that. Dad was real good at that. And suddenly you're wind up with 2,000 acres. What the heck are you supposed to do on 2,000 acres of ground except for grow cash grain? And they're trapped, and they are borrowing $850,000 a year to grow to make 50,000. Where's the other $800,000 going, folks? Corporate greed. And the farmers are getting milked by this industry, and it ain't right. Finances. What this social study shows is that there is misperceptions, and we have to understand what's going on with this decision-making framework. Number one, conventional farmers think that they're making the most money, and it's not true. Going regenerative makes just as much money as staying conventional, okay? Producing as much yields. You make just as much yield. I mean, you might have a little bit more yield in conventional, but you're making the national averages. What was also interesting is that the majority of both conventional and regenerative farmers say that soil health was one of their major drivers. But it's very clear that the conventional farmers are not using soil health practices. They're destroying their health practices. We can show them the numbers. So there's a lot to dig into right here. But right here, this is a really important one, the mental and physical wellness. I think that they can make more yield and more profit. They choose not to. We asked the farmers, the croppers, these were row croppers, which of these autoimmune diseases and mental health issues that they were facing in their families. 41% said they had allergies. 16%, 32%, a third of them have anxiety. Depression is present in at least a quarter, and that's self-reported, so that's probably low. And then I looked at the national averages for everybody, okay? All of the, not just croppers, like humans. Croppers have 58% higher allergy levels, 100% more asthma, 212% more depression. Then I asked them about Parkinson's, and I asked them about cancer. We're killing our farmers. We're killing our farmers. And I used to think that growing row crops just a little bit better was good enough. This is not okay anymore. It's not okay anymore. Something has to change. For corporate greed, we are killing our farming community. I used to think that the data was the most important outcome of this crazy experiment that we have. And it is important. I think these numbers tell the story of our food system in a way that makes people shift in their seats a little bit. But it's also the future, and it gives me a lot of hope. Because these farmers are successful, And they aren't just weird little anecdotes here and there. They're across the country. We met Del and Marie up in, they're wild blueberry farmers up in Maine. And Del and Marie are in their 80s, and they have been working their asses off their entire lives, and they risked everything for their communities and worked hard to fight the swell of industrialization of their wild blueberry farming communities up there. And they were at the end of their lives, and they just wanted to know that someone gives a shit, right? That somebody cares, that it was for something, that it's not just going to die. And then in drives this caravan of 3 crappy minivans, and it spills out these young and enthusiastic scientists that think that this is the coolest dang farm that they've ever seen. And I didn't understand how important it was for these farmers just to feel seen and to know how important they are. That when we leave that farm, we don't know what we're going to find, okay? Be it conventional or regenerative or whatever. We don't know what the numbers are going to be. But when we leave that farm, those farmers know that we care about them. We care about their families. We care about their farm. And that is a much different style of science than what's currently informing global food policies. There's a connection there, right? There's calluses on our hands. There's dirt under our fingernails. We've intimately explored these different food systems. This is my definition of what regenerative agriculture is. This came as a result of 1,300 farms and visiting a nation's food system. Regenerative farmers farm smaller and better, not bigger and simpler. That means a lot more farmers have to get out on the ground, doesn't it? Human feet have touched every acre of their farm. They're growing food that they eat, not that they put onto a train car and send to Seattle or to a feedlot in Nebraska. They're growing food, and they're celebrating life. I was driving with one of our scientists, and he pulled over. He lives over near Litchfield, and he stopped the car, and he pointed at a soybean field. He's like, "John, that farm was tilled. It was sprayed with herbicides. It planted. At planting, it received neonics and fungicides. It was sprayed again with herbicides. Post-plant, it had an insecticide fungicide mix flown over. It was harvested. It was tilled. It was sprayed again. Human feet haven't touched that piece of ground." That ain't farming, folks. That's mining. Connection matters. We would not be here without a lot of different people. Ecdysis staff who are in the audience, if you're brave enough, stand up, please. Stand up. Ecdysis folks who are planted in the audience to save my ass if things get out of hand. Thank you. Raise your hands back there, you lugs. Yeah. You know, it gets to be the point sometimes where you turn on the news and all you hear is bad news, right? And it's been that way my whole life. And it just seems to get worse and worse. And it feels like we're in this battle constantly. And we're out down on the battlefield and we're bloody and then we're tired. And suddenly you just want to know that there's hope. And with this staff, it's like we're looking at the horizon and we see the cavalry. And they're not taking this problem laying down. They're going to do something. So I'm so thankful to be able to work with such people. If you want to see us, come to your farm, please register. It takes about 2 minutes. And I got a little bit of time. Oh, all right. Whoa, okay. All right, how fast can you do it, guys? This is fun. This is fun for me. All right. There you go. Did we get it? I'll just leave it up there. All right. So what will you do with your extraordinary chance? So I was in New Zealand. Ryan, you were there. You were there that night. We were in New Zealand, and the regenerative farmers there was like 20 or 30 of them. They had finally come together for the first time. And they brought us out to this really cool spot. It was right along this little creek, and there was this huge like saw blade. It was like the size of that QR code, right? A circular saw blade. And then they lit a bonfire underneath it and started cooking meat on this saw blade in the middle. All of these farmers brought food that they had grown and were there and wanted to share it. And it was a really magical experience, a magical night. And I got to talking with this one farmer he was older, and one thing led to another, and he explained he was actually a pastor, a church pastor. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay. And then one thing led to another again, and he started talking about Richard Dawkins. Have you ever heard of Richard Dawkins? He's an evolutionist. And I asked him, I'm like, what on earth, how do you know about Richard Dawkins? He's like, I don't just know about him, I met him. I flew to the Galapagos Islands to actually meet this guy. He was a Darwinist. And I'm like, what on earth would a preacher go to meet this fellow for? And he's like, because I heard this story. And so I'm going to tell that story as best as I can. Richard Dawkins' story is, the earth kind of congeals out of random events 4 billion years ago. Rocks in space kind of gather together into form this ball, right? And it's just the right spot from the sun, not too hot, not too dry, or not too cold. And after millions and millions of years, 3.7 billion years, nucleic acids kind of randomly associate these molecules, and they turn into the first remnants, or like the rudimentary fragments of life. Through generations and generations, millions of years, random events end up making those nucleic acids into bacteria and then plant life. And all of the different forms of life end up happening. And through violent contractions and rapid series of growth, life expands onto land, right? All of this is happening through random chance. Humans evolve eventually, right? From all of these different animals that could have happened, humans are there. This happens about 370,000 years ago. Cultures rise, cultures fall, and then through random events, 2 people from all of the millions of people on Earth meet, and they fall in love, and then they get busy. And out of the 20,000 genes that each of them is contributing to this offspring, the random association of genes assembles into you. Nothing like you has ever been on planet Earth before, and nothing like you is ever going to be on this place again. You're beautiful, and you are perfect, and you're exactly where you're supposed to be right now. Now, what are you going to do with such an extraordinary chance? We all have a choice in how we live our lives and what we decide to do with that. And I hope that will help to guide you. I've used that quote for many years now as one of my guiding forces. Regardless of what your faith is or what your belief system is, I think we can all agree that we have an extraordinary chance, and let's take it. And that's all I got.